gentlemen, and welcome to the Fishing Education monthly seminar. This month's seminar is Pond Management Part 2, discussion about vegetation, good vegetation versus bad vegetation. If you would please, as this seminar progresses, if you have any questions, please put it inside the chat, and we'll get around to answering those at the end. Everybody, remember, keep your microphones muted. That way our panelists do not have an issue with getting to talk and everybody can hear what's going on. To start off with, we're going to do a few little introductions. My name's James Davidson. I work for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's Fishing Education Program. I am the coordinator for the Fishing in the Natural State Program. Why I do it? Well, I get to deal with educators around the state and share my passion for fish and fishing. Not only those educators, but get them to take it on and share it with the students they teach. Matt, you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody about you?
I'm Matt Horton. I work for the Arkansas Game and Fish. I'm our Aquatic Nuisance Species Program Coordinator. I work out of the Mayflower office, so I'm centrally located, and my work covers the entire state. My program's goal is to prevent the introduction, establishment, and spread of invasive aquatic species in our state's waters. We've had a number of what we call aquatic nuisance species, most of which are invasive, introduced into our state. These include fish, crayfish, plants, diseases, birds, animals, you name it. They come in all shapes and sizes. The most numerous category of organisms are invasive aquatic plants, which I'm going to talk to you about later on in the program. So I look forward to doing that.
Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Jones. I'm the Small Impoundment Extension Specialist for the Extension Service out of University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. I have a statewide jurisdiction for pond management, specializing in fish biology, stocking, and management of that sort. I'll be talking about aquatic weeds, aquatic plants, some beneficial ones, and a little bit about management. We won't go too deep into the weeds, so to speak, on that. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. So we'll go over some general stuff and then take some questions near the end.
Colton?
Good evening. I'm Colton Dennis. I'm the South Arkansas Fisheries Habitat Biologist with Arkansas Game and Fish, stationed out of Hope, Arkansas. I've been a fisheries biologist at the Game and Fish for about 28 years. Two of my main job duties are to conduct small-scale habitat improvement projects on our area lakes using natural materials such as trees and aquatic plants, and artificial materials, PVC, mossbacks, pallets. I also coordinate with spray contractors for aquatic plants that are certified with the state, who have airboats and surface drive boats to spray nuisance and or invasive aquatic vegetation in our area lakes, such as alligator weed and water hyacinth. Why does the Game and Fish employ fisheries habitat biologists? Well, habitat is one of the three main components that make up fisheries management. Of course, you have the fish, the people, and then the habitat that the fish live in. So it's a very important component of good fisheries management is habitat. I'm one of three habitat biologists here in Arkansas, located in South Arkansas. There's one in North Central and Central Arkansas, but all of our district fisheries biologists located around the state also conduct habitat work. And why we do it, one of the main reasons is, a lot of y'all know, a lot of our state lakes are 50+ years old. Even our Corps of Engineers lakes are 50 years and older, and they've lost a lot of their natural cover. And so that's why we go in and cut trees from the shoreline, build brush piles, plant aquatic vegetation, trying to replace some of that natural cover that's been lost over time. Another reason is to control native or non-native aquatic plant growth and spread. Just in my 28 years with the commission, I've really seen invasives and non-native plants and fish species really grow here in Arkansas. It's taken up a lot larger role in our jobs and in our budgets. So it's very important to manage aquatic plants. And for farm pond owners, y'all probably seen this too. You know, as your ponds age, sedimentation in some of your older ponds. I got one on my farm, and shallow water promotes plant growth, and shallow clear water really promotes plant growth. So it's very important to manage your aquatic plants not only on our lakes but in your farm ponds. And another reason we're do so much work on habitat on our lakes is we want to keep our bank fishing areas open for our anglers, keep boat lanes and other areas of the lake open to angling. And it's all about, the bottom line is, while we manage our habitats and spend so much time and money on working on our habitats, is to make fishing better for our anglers. And I'm sure that's why a lot of y'all are listening tonight on this webinar, is you want to make fishing better in your farm ponds. Do you have anybody else, Bo, or you want me to go into roles and resources?
Go ahead and go into your role, the game and fish role in farm pond management and resources.
Real briefly, as I mentioned, we have 3 fisheries habitat biologists here in Arkansas, and plus our district biologists, 20 of them located around the state. They do habitat work on their lakes and their districts. And they also provide farm pond assistance in the form of aquatic plant identification and also treatment options on how to treat that aquatic plant in your pond. That's real important because there's no one chemical that's going to treat all the different plant species that can be growing in your pond. So that's real important for us to be able to positively ID the aquatic plant that is being a problem in your pond. And a picture, you know, a simple picture of the plant and of the pond will really help us diagnose what that plant species is and can offer options, treatment options to the landowner, to the pond owner. And so that's really the basic guidance and assistance we provide to farm pond owners. And like I said, it can be a picture sent to one of our biologists of the plant and of the pond for us to ID, and then to give you a prescription of how to control that aquatic plant. And really, that's all I have, Bo.
All right, thank you. Matt, you want to go on a little bit and talk about your role with ANS and what they can do to help prevent aquatic nuisance species inside their ponds?
All right, sorry about that. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to talk about invasive aquatic plants in Arkansas. And the first thing I want to talk about and really answer the question of is, what is an invasive species? An invasive species is a non-native organism whose introduction can cause or is likely to cause ecological or economic harm or harm to human health. And there's 4 main characteristics of invasive species that lend to their invasive nature. These include the lack of natural predators in their introduced range, so they don't have any predators that help naturally control their population. They're fast growing. Typically, their growth rate exceeds that of native species. They have a high reproductive rate, so either they reproduce more frequently or have a higher reproductive capacity than native species, and they're generalists. So they can tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions and different types of habitat. We've observed 17 different species of invasive aquatic plants in Arkansas, and this is a list of those species. Includes giant Solvenia, water hyacinth, alligator weed, hydrilla, and so on. For more information on these species, such as images and background information, you can go to our ANS webpage on the Game and Fish website, which I'll provide that information a little bit later on in the presentation. But I wanted to highlight some of the top 3 species of greatest concern, or the species that have the greatest potential to cause harm or have caused the most problems in our state to date. These include giant Solvenia, water hyacinth, and alligator weed. Giant Solvenia is a floating aquatic fern. It's from South America. It's been in the United States for several decades, and it was brought in through the aquarium trade for water gardens because it is a pretty plant, especially in aquariums. But it's one of the fastest growing plants in the world. It can double in vegetative mass every 3 to 4 days under ideal conditions. It can create up to 400 tons of aquatic vegetative mass per acre. There are places and lakes in Louisiana where they've had lakes get completely covered up by this stuff, and there's 3-foot thick mats that you can walk across where there's over 10 foot of water underneath it. So very harmful. We don't want it in our state. Louisiana and Texas spend millions of dollars a year just trying to control this plant and water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is very similar to giant Solvenia in that it's a floating aquatic plant. It's pretty unique. It's a very beautiful plant, which is why, again, it was brought in through the aquarium and water garden trade. It produces a pretty purple flower. It's got thick, fleshy leaves and bulbs in the stem that contain air, which aids in its buoyancy. It's primarily located in South Arkansas, kind of south of the Arkansas River, especially in southeast Arkansas. Back to giant Solvenia just for a second. It was first introduced into Arkansas in 2017, so it's one of our newest invaders. It was found in Smith Park Lake down in Miller County, and it's been introduced into 5 water bodies down in southwest Arkansas, and currently is only found in Lake Columbia and Erling. Last Friday, we found a new introduction into Mercer Bayou, so we're working to contain and eradicate that introduction right now. Alligator weed is more widespread in the state. It can be found statewide, but primarily in the southern half of the state. The picture you see there was from Lake Conway in central Arkansas. It can be rooted into the ground on the edge of the shoreline or in the bank or in shallow water. It has the ability to shoot up the roots up to 3 feet deep into the ground. Once the plant grows out into the water, it primarily spreads by fragmentation. And the individual floating plants, or every place on the stem, the nodes that grow a leaf, can produce a new plant. And the plants can also remain floating around in the water without having to be rooted into a substrate. Very aggressive, fast-growing plant as well. And the Arkansas Game and Fish spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year over, at a minimum $100,000 a year trying to control just alligator weed. Again, we've had it in the state for about 30 years. Invasive aquatic plants pose several threats to aquatic systems, and especially in farm ponds. They can outcompete and displace native plant species. They can reduce fish growth and reproduction, as well as degrade water quality and even cause fish kills. As these plants spread and become abundant, a lot of them, especially the floating plants, will completely cover the surface of the pond or the water body, blocking sunlight and oxygen in the water, reducing productivity. Also, as this large volume of aquatic vegetation decomposes, that process removes oxygen from the water, which is what will cause fish kills. They can also block fishing and boating access, increase the evaporation rate of a water body, and they cost an incredible amount of money to control. There's 3 main ways that invasive aquatic plants and other plants for that matter can make it into your pond or water body. Natural means intentional dispersal and unintentional dispersal. So natural pathways include wind and water currents that may move plants or plant fragments around. But also birds and mammals such as beavers can move plants and plant fragments from one water body to the next. Intentional dispersal is typically like egocentric stalking of a species because of its perceived benefit. An example is anglers historically have moved hydrilla, which is an invasive aquatic plant, from one water body to the next, hoping that it could improve bass fishing. But there's always unintended consequences. Also, dumping of overgrown or unwanted plants from aquariums and water gardens. That's how giant Solvenia and water hyacinth and many other species made it into the United States, is by dumping of aquarium and water garden contents. So that's definitely something you don't want to do. Unintentional dispersal includes, which is the most common, is where you have a plant or a plant fragment or seeds that get attached to, say, your boat motor, your trailer, your hunting and fishing equipment, and it gets unknowingly transported from one water body to the next. And this is how we just got giant Solvenia in Mercer Bayou, and also all of the other water bodies in our state. So there's a few simple things that you can do to help prevent the introduction and spread of invasive aquatic plants, as well as other animals. First, clean, drain, and dry your boat, motor, trailer, and hunting and fishing equipment before you leave the boat access, or especially before you put it into a new water body. Remove any vegetation or debris, mud, or anything that's on your boat and equipment. It doesn't take but a second for you to walk around your boat and look through your decoys as you put them into your bag. Duck decoys are common for spreading aquatic plants. Drain all the water from your boat. There can be plant fragments and seeds in the water that's in the bilge area of your boat or in your live well, so please drain all the water. It's also state law now that you have to remove all plugs before leaving the water body. And then let all of your equipment dry, preferably for up to 5 days, but at least try to let it dry as best as possible, and that will help desiccate any plants that are trying to hitch a ride on your equipment. Also, dispose of any aquarium or water garden contents by placing them in a sealed bag and throwing them in the trash. Don't dump them out in the yard or put them down the storm drain or let them go into your pond, because most likely if there's enough plant material there, it's going to establish spread and cause significant problems. And then report aquatic nuisance species to the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. We need the public's help in identifying these invasive aquatic plants and other organisms before they can establish. By filing a report with the Game and Fish, using our online reporting tool, or contacting me, the ANS program coordinator, that allows us to quickly respond to new introductions and hopefully contain and eradicate them before they are allowed to spread and establish. And if anybody sees giant Solvenia, it is one of our species of greatest concern for our state. So immediately report that either through this online reporting tool, or my contact information is listed on our ANS webpage, and I'll provide it at the end of this presentation. The picture there here at the bottom is from our ANS webpage, which is located on the Game and Fish website. It's agfc.com/ANS. Here we have all kinds of information such as species identification, imagery, ANS prevention information, any publications that we put out on aquatic nuisance species, and then our online reporting tool. If you click the red button at the top of the page, it says report an aquatic nuisance species here. It takes you to our online reporting tool. This online reporting tool sends the report directly to me, and I can use that information to follow up with whoever provided the report and respond accordingly. It takes 1 to 2 minutes to fill out the form. The information that you need to file a report includes an email, the date of the observation or that you collected the species, what species it is, if you know, what water body it came from. If it's a private pond, you can just state private pond. The GPS coordinates, those are very helpful in identifying the location. Contact information so I can follow up with you, and then pictures. Try to get good close-up pictures of whatever it is you're trying to submit a report for, so that I can properly identify it once that report comes to me. There's a few resources that are going to be available to you soon, hopefully in the coming months, that are going to aid in aquatic plant management. The first is an Arkansas Aquatic Invasive Plants Identification and Control publication that UAPB's extension specialists, Scott and George Selden, are working on. This will provide all the information on those 17 species and more that I'm talking about today. Also, that's going to be turned into a identification card deck, a laminated card deck, like you see there at the top right, the picture, so that you could have that in your tackle box, toolbox, in your vehicle, in your boat, or wherever you're going, so that if you need to identify these, you'll have that handy. Also, I'm working to develop an ANS reporting app for smartphones, and this will aid in identification of these invasive species and allow you to file a report while you're in the field with your phone, even if you don't have cellular connectivity. That will definitely help us in responding and protecting our state's waters. And the last is an ANS report dashboard. So all these reports that I'm talking about go into a database, and I'm creating a dashboard. This is a picture of the dashboard that I'm working on. It's still under development, but it will show the geographic distribution of all the invasive aquatic species, including aquatic plants, that have been reported and confirmed by the Game and Fish in our state. You can search by county, by all the species, by date, fisheries district, watershed, water body, however you'd like. There's additional resources to provide pre-made maps and customizable maps if you want to make them. And then, of course, links back to the ANS webpage. All of this information, once available, will be provided on the ANS webpage with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. So with that, I just wanted to provide everybody with my contact information. Again, if you see an aquatic invasive species, please report it. Feel free to contact me by email or by phone if you have any questions. I'm always happy to answer any questions and help you out with your farm pond issues related to aquatic invasive species.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. Scott, you want to talk a little bit about UAPB's role in it?
Yep. So we have a statewide jurisdiction to help with private pond and lake management. So anything from tiny quarter-acre ponds to private 300 or 400 acre ponds. If it's private, it's our jurisdiction. So if you have a private impoundment and need some help with it, everything from construction, repairs, leaks, aquatic weeds, fish management, habitat, fish kills, diagnosis, fish feeding, aerators, anything that has to do with ponds or lake management on the private land, then we are supposed to help. So at the end of my presentation, I've got contact information on how to reach us. We have websites. We've got all kinds of emails. We'll get to that in a second. So I've got some information to go through real quick. I'll try to burn through as fast as we can and try to get as much useful information as we can quickly, and then we'll try to leave a good bit of time for questions. Before we get cooking on this, if you have questions, specific questions about a specific weed or a specific situation, if you could put that down in the chat, because none of our presentations are going to be highly specific about anything because we just don't have the time to get into everything. But if we do not get to your question, we will follow up with you later by email to try to answer and come up with a solution to your issue. So if you have a specific question, please put it in the chat. We'll get to the ones we can. The ones we cannot, we will respond to later. All right, are we full screened on the presentation? All right. You guys are muted. Can you see everything?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right, here we go. So not going to get too generic on stuff. The role of plants in ponds is very important. They are beneficial for aquatic invertebrates all the way up to fish. So our baby fish live in the weeds. Our big adult fish use it for habitat and for refuge. It can actually provide some benefits in water clearing and even serves as good a target for anglers. So if you know where the fish are hanging out, then you tend to be more efficient whenever you fish that place. The trouble with aquatic weeds, especially in small ponds, is that they tend to get out of control. And additionally, when especially rooted or emergent plants start getting wild in ponds, they tend to take energy away from phytoplankton that tend to be the base of the pond food chain, which can ultimately lead to slower growth and lower max size of our fish. Uh, Obviously, for a lot of people, especially dealing with rooted submerged plants or algae, it gets way more difficult to fish the pond, especially in late summer when we get so many weeds growing. It's tough to just get a bait in and out of there. And typically, when we're dealing with really shallow ponds, especially the old ones that are kind of filling in, any kind of aquatic plant tends to become problematic. So we typically deal with the idea of eradication in a lot of small ponds rather than management. So literature has shown that fish production and max size growth, just general fishing, tends to improve or reach kind of a maximum threshold around 20 to 30% vegetative coverage in terms of area. So that's on bigger reservoirs, but the concept holds true for smaller impoundments and ponds as well. 20 to 30% of your area occupied by habitat, whether it be timber, brush, or plants, tends to result in better fishing. The trouble with that is usually in small, shallow ponds, if we're dealing with plants, they tend to cover up too much of the shoreline or entirely circle it, and especially if they're tall plants, you can't even cast over them, or it's just tough to get bait through, and it ultimately becomes a bigger pain in the butt than it's worth. So typically when we're talking about plants in small ponds, we're talking about managing them, limiting their spread, or eradicating them altogether because of the trouble that they cause. So if you are trying to get plants established, the key word that you want to stick with is variety and native. So native plants are perfectly fine in our ponds, but do understand if you do try to start beneficial plants, that even beneficial native plants can become problematic if you are not controlling them. Think of your garden. A plant is only a weed whenever it's growing somewhere that it is not wanted. And all you need to grow a plant is mud, sun, and water. Ponds have all of them. So a pond is naturally going to start growing weeds. You have to tend to that garden. You have to tend to that pond on a regular basis, or it will start getting out of control. Even your nice, pretty plants that you put there can become weeds if you let them get out of control. So going over some really quick examples of some nice, pretty weeds. So here we've got a really nice example of a natural looking pond with wonderful shoreline plants leading out into emergent floating rooted plants. So on the foreground, we've got horsetail up in the closest to you. We've got nice pickerel weed with the purple flowers fading down into water lilies, hardy water lilies of a variety of species and colors. And they give you a nice little blend of foreground, midground, and background. And they match well together. They stabilize the shoreline. They give good fish habitat, good cover. But to some pond owners, this is ugly. Some pond owners, they want nice manicured golf club grass all the way down to the water and not a blade of grass anywhere in the water. So it depends on what you want it to look like, whether this is a pretty pond or a weedy, swampy looking mess. So some not so good examples. We actually have some decent plants in this one. We have some rushes along the edges that are really good at shoreline stabilization. But what happened in this case, this is an old pond that is starting to fill in, and you can see out in the middle, it has lilies that are starting to take over the entire body of water. So what the owner had done was kind of a stopgap. They got an excavator with an extra long arm, and they dug around the edges of the pond to make a circle around the lilies deeper. So they actually controlled weeds on the outside perimeter of the pond by digging it deeper, but they still have the middle of the pond completely covered up with lilies. So the control measure was somewhat effective, but it only was effective as far as the excavator could reach out into the pond. So the next not so good example, this is kind of what a lot of ponds look like. You've got really slow sloping banks going down into kind of shallow water overall. And you've got some shoreline weeds here that aren't really all that problematic, but you got tons of filamentous algae. And it may be tough to see in the picture here, but the little discoloration you see out in the water, that's mats of filamentous algae that are impossible to fish through and actually can be detrimental to the growth and max size of your fish if they get too abundant. Now here going into some really, really bad examples of aquatic plants. This is an irrigation reservoir used for agricultural purposes. Max depth, maybe 3 or 5 feet throughout the entire impoundment. This would think was a 150-acre impoundment, and 99% of it was matted from the bottom to the top with coontail. And if you look closely in the bottom left of the picture, that little white thing down there, that's a dead fish. So this irrigation pond had a fish kill because the vegetation was so abundant that it ultimately choked the pond out of oxygen and killed the fish. So here is a picture that Matt would have hives about. So this is a beautiful plant. Oh, it's so pretty. It's wonderful. The trouble is it is an extremely invasive non-native. This is water hyacinth. Water hyacinth. It's a beautiful plant, which is why it got introduced. And it causes devastation where it is introduced. It can completely cover up a small impoundment to where you can't even tell that there's water there. And that can even lead to drowning risks. If you have kids or animals that don't realize that that patch of pretty green and purple flowers is actually a pond, you could easily slip down in there and get into some trouble. So this is obviously a big, bad problem. Another example here of an old worn out pond. So we actually have native plants in here. We've got lilies, we've got some primrose around the edge, and we've got duckweed and watermeal on the surface. Underneath it is a bunch of filamentous algae. So the trouble with this pond is it's just old, it's shallow, and the only real solution to this, while you could get under control with aquatic weed or aquatic herbicides, it's old and it's got a ton of organics built up in the bottom of it, and it's really shallow. So it's just an endless fight with these things. The solution to this is not chemicals, it's excavation, digging out the organic material that has accumulated and refilling nice and fresh from the start. Okay, so I'm going to run through 6 different beneficial species that are often recommended if you want to establish some plants in your pond and you have the wherewithal to keep up with them and let them not get out of control. Here are 6 that tend to do pretty well, and they look nice and they spread relatively controllably. A really nice one is Arrowhead, and there are multiple Sagittarius species. I have some growing around my house as a decoration. They don't necessarily have to be in water, but Arrowhead does very well on shorelines. It looks pretty. It does get fairly tall. They can get 4 feet or so max height, depending on the species. They can grow up to about 3 feet deep, and they're really cool background. So if you are looking at a pond and you want to have a cool background away from where you're going to have people fishing, Arrowhead's actually a nice idea to provide a nice big tall background for your kind of natural looking pond. Trouble is they are very attractive to ducks, so they probably will need to be protected if you are planting arrowheads with some wire mesh or some fencing whenever they're babies. And once they get mature, they should be able to handle the herbivory, but you definitely need to protect them early on. Other plants that are really good at shoreline stabilization, so if you have a pond that has banks that are getting kind of worn out by waves and wind action, rushes are pretty good at stabilizing the soil and providing some wave abatement and keeping the banks from washing away. They do grow out into the water a little bit, but not very deep, maybe a foot or 2 max. They do provide some habitat to your fish, some habitat and refuge for insects and invertebrates. And they are really resistant to desiccation, so they don't dry out very well. In the summer, when your pond dries a little bit and goes down a couple of feet, your rushes will probably still be okay, and they may actually expand out a little bit deeper to provide you some better habitat when they come back. Another really popular species is lizard's tail. This is a nice aromatic plant that has a pretty cool little flower structure. They grow up to about 2 or 3 feet tall, out to a couple of feet of water. This one also will need to be protected from grazing. Deer and other herbivorous critters along the bank will come and graze on these things, especially when they're babies, so they need to be protected while they're growing. Pickerel weed is another really popular option. It has really pretty flowers and these waxy looking leaves that look really nice. Good habitat for fish. They can grow about 4 feet tall as well. They will need protection when they are young. And as a little pause in what we're shooting through a lot of this information. I will have links to this presentation along with some handy resources at the end of the presentation. There's a Dropbox account where you can go and download all this junk. So don't worry about taking notes furiously while we're trying to run through these. Just kind of follow along and listen. So Hearty Lilies, these are plants that are rooted to the bottom. They actually grow out into the water a little bit. So there are numerous Nymphaea species, the lilies here. And basically you can select them based on the color of the flowers. The cool thing about the Hearty Lilies is they only grow a couple, 3 feet deep or so. They provide really good shade habitat for your fish. So when you're looking at them from the surface, it looks like, wow, they're covering up the whole pond, but underneath it, the stems are really thin. So the fish can actually get around perfectly fine, even though the top of the pond looks to be completely covered in weeds. So these are pretty good at slow growth. They're manageable compared to the big American lotus ones with the big flowers that come out of the water. The Hearty Lilies, the Nymphaea species, tend to do better in the small pond environment than some of the bigger species do. Another popular plant that is basically the only submerged plant that we're going to talk about is eelgrass, also known as Vallisonera or water celery. It goes by several names. This is a submerged plant that grows a couple, 3 feet tall or so, and depending on the clarity of your water, it can grow up to 10 feet deep. If you have really clean water, it can grow 8 to 10 feet deep. If it's kind of murky, maybe only a couple of 3 feet deep. Really good habitat for fish. It's easy to get lures in and out of it, but it is highly vulnerable to herbivory. So if you have lots of turtles, or if you have grass carp in the pond already, eelgrass just ain't gonna work. You'll want to try something else. Okay, so we do not have time to go into the nitty details of what to do about every species of plant because, as was mentioned earlier, herbicides get thrown around a lot. But the drawback to herbicides is that one chemical does not treat all aquatic plants equally, and each chemical may have different formulations that work as a surface application versus a subsurface application. So there's a lot of minutia that goes into herbicide treatment that we just do not have time for. So we're going to go into some basics. So one of the leading causes of weed growth, especially excessive weed growth in ponds, is you just have too many nutrients. There's lots of phosphorus, lots of nitrogen that has built up over time. This is usually a side effect of older ponds that have lots of leaf litter, lots of sticks, lots of feeding or fertilization that's built up over time that basically cycles through the pond. Once you get phosphorus and nitrogen into a pond, it tends to stay there and it will cycle through the mud and the water and the plants depending on the time of year and basically what's growing in it at the time. So the best prevention is to keep the nutrients from getting excessive in the first place. So one of the strategies is to limit how much fertile water enters the pond. So if you have a pond on a agricultural property or doing livestock, especially if you have poultry operations, it's a great idea to try to divert water from those intensive agricultural areas around the pond. Unless the pond is deliberately being used for runoff filtration, then that's just kind of part of the game. But if it is a fishing pond on an agricultural property, you actually want to try to keep the agricultural runoff from going directly into the pond because it tends to lead to lots of filamentous algae or real thick planktonic algae that tends to lead to the blue-green algae that cause toxicity and fish kills in the summer and make our fish taste real bad. So if you do have a high load of nutrients built up in your pond, there are some things that you can do to mitigate it. There are products out there that bind to nutrients and lock them in the mud. If you're just wanting the absolute cheapest route possible, you can source just raw aluminum sulfate and hydrated lime and use that in a 2-to-1 ratio to extract nutrients from the water and lock it into the soil. The problem with the aluminum sulfate and the hydrated lime, by themselves, each of those chemicals will kill your fish. So you have to be extremely careful in its application. And there are fact sheets on how to use aluminum sulfate safely in your ponds. But if you're not comfortable with that type of risk, then don't use it. Use one of these other commercially available products like Phoslock or Phosclear. So these chemicals are already pre-buffered, or they come like Phoslock, for example, is a type of clay. It does not need buffering. Phos Clear is actually a buffered aluminum sulfate product that is already buffered. You put it right in the pond, it's ready to go. The drawback to these commercially available products, obviously, they're more expensive. It took more time to process them, so they are more expensive, but they are safe to apply directly to the pond. If you have duckweed problems, if you have filamentous algae problems, if you have blue-green algae problems, the nutrient sequestration strategies are something you should investigate. Some other mitigation strategies, physical control options. So this is basically messing with the physical characteristics of water, changing its depth or changing its transparency. So aquatic dyes are something that you can use to reduce the amount of light that reaches your plants. Golf courses use this on a regular basis. They need to fertilize their course to keep the grass green and healthy throughout the year. That leads to a lot of phosphorus that gets into those pretty little ponds on the property. And to help mitigate the algae issues that they run into on those golf courses, you will often see those ponds heavily dyed. That's why golf course ponds often look kind of weird. Often it's because of dyes. You can also, if you're dealing with a rooted aquatic plant, if you keep the pond higher, keep the water deeper, it will reduce the growth of those rooted plants and might help you get ahead of them. Something else you can do physically is to actually circulate or aerate the pond. So different types of aerators have different capabilities of circulation. Generally, if you have deep water, we're talking 8 to 10 feet deep or deeper, diffused aeration systems do a good job of circulating water and keeping it moving throughout the pond. Moving water absolutely suppresses some aquatic weeds. Duckweed and watermeal are suppressed by it. Now, I didn't say stopped, I said suppressed. You still can have those weeds, but the circulation helps. Filamentous algae, circulation helps, but it doesn't stop it. Another big deal that aeration does is it keeps oxygen down at the bottom of the pond where your pond's natural bacteria process and break down organic material, where a lot of your nutrients are coming from. So if you've ever seen pond companies that are pushing beneficial bacteria to get rid of the muck in your pond, you don't need that shit. It's already in your pond. You just need the oxygen to get down there to feed your natural bacteria so that they can naturally process your organics. So aeration is a big, big deal, especially in deeper ponds. Now, if you have a shallower pond, let's say 6 feet or less, diffused aeration is not very effective. You need to use a surface aeration system, either with the vertical pump aerators or with a paddle wheel aerator to move water and keep things oxygenated. Okay, mechanical removal. So this is basically using tools or machines to take weeds out. If you live in an HOA that does not allow chemicals, this may be your only option. If you are iffy about using chemical in your pond, this may be your only practical option. The trouble with tools or machines is the area that you can affect is limited. It's a lot of work. You look at the weeds out in the pond and it doesn't look too bad until you start putting a rake to it and you find out how many pounds of plants are in a very small area. So it's a lot of hard work, but it is something that can work in a small area if you've got the time to do it. You can also work smarter through machines. So if you have a tractor and you've got some welding skills, you can jerry rig some machines to help you rake this stuff out. Benefits to raking weeds out, you are actually taking nutrients out of the pond. So all of that plant material is storing phosphorus and nitrogen that if you kill with herbicides will break down and release right back into the water. One of the biggest troubles with treating filamentous algae, for example, if you kill filamentous algae with a herbicide, these are fast-acting chemicals. The algae dies within days, and all of the nutrients that were in that algae gets released right back into the water. And algae is a single-celled plant, and you cannot possibly kill all of it. That single-celled plant starts replicating immediately with all of the fresh nutrients you just put into the pond. In 2 weeks, the pond looked just as bad as it did right before you treated it with chemical. So physically removing can be beneficial. Okay, going to go into some biological treatments. We talk about grass carp quite a bit. They do not eat everything equally well. They do well on submerged plants. If you can take it and grind it up with your fingers, grass carp might do a decent job of it. We have fact sheets that will show you exactly what plants they control well. Some general points on grass carp: 3 to 5 per acre is good for prevention. If you have a plant that's already causing troubles, it may take 20 or 25 grass carp or more per acre to get it under control. And it's also going to take a bare minimum of 2 years to get it under control if grass carp are your only control measure. You'll need to restock these dudes every 5 to 7 years because their lifespan is limited. And when they get old and fat, they don't eat as much as they did when they were young. Okay. Tilapia are actually really good on filamentous algae. The trick is tilapia can absolutely compete with native species, and we need to be very careful about allowing them to escape into the wild. The good thing about the tilapia is that they will die in the mid to low 40s for pretty much all species. Some of them die in the low 50s, but all species of tilapia are dead when the water is in the low 40s. So if you have a pond on a property that has a low risk of escape into natural waters, tilapia are a reasonable treatment option for filamentous algae. Goldfish actually do pretty well on duckweed and watermeal. And a lot of times in aquaponics setups, they will keep their goldfish alive by feeding them duckweed and watermeal. The trouble with goldfish is they're often white or gold. They stand out really well in the water. If you have largemouth bass in your pond, goldfish will not work. They just can't get big enough for escaping the typical largemouth bass that are in ponds. But if you have a small pond, a backyard ornamental garden, for example, and you've got a duckweed problem, goldfish will do really, really well. Okay, chemicals. There is a chemical that will kill every plant in your pond, but not every one chemical will kill all plants equally well. So the first step to treatment with chemicals, you have to positively identify the plant. Once you have identified the plant, you can start breaking down which herbicides are going to be most effective. The good thing about herbicides is they often are fast, so we can kill a lot of plants really, really quickly. One of the problems with herbicides is we can kill a whole lot of plants really, really quickly. So in the mid to late summer, if you use a fast-acting contact herbicide and you treat too much of the pond at once, with you have 80% of the pond covered in weeds, and you use a fast-acting contact herbicide, it's going to kill those weeds very, very fast. When the plants are decomposing, that process uses oxygen. So if you kill so much plant that the supply of oxygen that the pond naturally produces is outrun by the decomposition needs of the bacteria breaking down those plants, you will kill your fish from a dissolved oxygen kill. So what will often happen with a fish kill, that I did a herbicide treatment and I killed all my fish. It wasn't from the toxicity of the herbicide, especially if you followed the label. The herbicide didn't kill the fish. The decomposition of the plants that were killed by the herbicide is what killed your fish. So you have to be very careful with them. Some of the herbicides are systemic, where they get into the plant and they work through the structures and get down to the roots and they kill it from the roots up. These tend to be more slow acting, where it may be 2 or 3 months before you see full effect. But once they kill the plants, they are dead for the entire year. These chemicals tend to be more expensive. They work more slowly, and you have to treat the entire body of water rather than just doing spot treatments like you can with contact herbicides. The label instructions are difficult to read. They're not fun to read. They are an instruction manual. So they can be tough to read, and you have to do conversions. You have to do some math to figure out what the volume of your pond and the concentrations necessary to do the appropriate treatment. But the label on the herbicide that you purchase tells you exactly how to safely do it. If you apply that chemical in a way that is not in compliance with the label, then you are breaking the law. If something were to happen and your treated water were to get out into public waters and harm public wildlife, you would be liable for the damages. Obviously, most ponds, that's not an issue, but just understand that the herbicide's label is exactly how to use it, and if you do not use it by those instructions, you are breaking the law. One thing that I like to recommend when we're dealing with aquatic weed issues in private impoundments, don't do one only thing. So if we only do grass carp, it's going to take 2 years to control it, if it controls it at all. If we do herbicides, we can kill all those plants really, really quick, but a lot of them are going to grow back in 2, 3, 4 weeks, just as bad as they were before. If we only do aquatic dyes, we will slow down the growth of some plants, but the plants that are growing 2 to 3 feet deep or shallower are still growing just as fat and happy as they were before. So if we can combine different strategies, aquatic dye, herbicide to kind of knock stuff back up front, and then use a biological control for mid to long-term management, then you can get a better overall treatment effect by doing multiple things all together. Now, some beneficial or helpful sources for identifying plants. There are 2 really good websites that you need to know about. Aquaplant, maintained by Texas A&M University, and Plants at the University of Florida Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. Both of these websites are very helpful. Aquaplant tends to be a little bit more user-friendly, but Florida has more pictures. So each one has kind of the benefits. Both of these can help. Professionals in the state that can help you. You've got your district biologists. Their primary responsibility are public bodies of water, but they do help private bodies of water when they have the time. Your county extension agents, most of them have been trained by me to help identify some of these plants and can generally help the simple, easy ones pretty easily. If they can't solve your problem by themselves, they'll call me and then we'll work on a plan together. And there are also 4 pond management companies in Arkansas that do comprehensive management. If you say, okay, well, I've got this weed, I know that this chemical works, but I don't know about putting a chemical out in my pond, I'm kind of skittish about it. There are private companies you can hire that are certified that can come out and do it for you. Okay, so here is my contact information. I have 2 QR codes here. The one at the top right, if you put your QR scanner on that, it will take you directly to a Dropbox account that has this PowerPoint and a list of resources that have links where you can find them online. And also the UAPB pond management website is down here in the bottom right. It'll take you straight to my website, and it has most of the same stuff we've been talking about here. So a fire hose amount of information in a very short amount of time. Let's start getting into some questions.
Thanks, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, I put a series of links that Scott provided over in the chat, as well as the Dropbox link to the presentation he just shared with you, and Scott's contact information, his email, and who he is and who he's with over in the chat as well. One of the things y'all can do today is right there in the chat area, you'll see the 3 sideways dots. If you click on it, you'll see a deal up there where you can save chat. It will save it in a file in your computer where y'all can refer back to these links later on, as well as contact information that's been placed there. Scott, guys, one of the questions I've already received is, let me get back up here to it. What is the best treatment for Chara? Chara.
Chara is a type of macroalgae, and it tends to be treated fairly well with copper sulfate based chemicals. Typically, we will lean towards a chelated form like Cutrine Plus. If you talk to the Extension Service, generally they shy away from talking about brands, but we do often reference whatever the most popular brand is. And Cutrine Plus is a copper-based chemical that does work very well on basically all algae, including the Chara. If you want to use one of the more just generic copper sulfate-based chemicals, you'll need to have a water test done first to determine whether or not the chemical is going to be safe in your pond. So one of the drawbacks to straight copper sulfate is that at low alkalinities, we're talking 20 milligrams per liter or less, copper itself can be directly toxic to your fish. I have seen copper applied to ponds with lower alkalinity than 20 milligrams per liter and it not harm the fish, but it is risky, especially if you start getting 15 or 10 milligrams per liter or lower. Also, if your hardness is very high, so if you have 250 milligrams per liter or more of hardness, especially straight copper, but also Cutrine Plus, will actually be just extracted out of the water. It'll bind immediately with the calcium and magnesium in your water and be rendered neutral or ineffective almost immediately. So it's a good idea to have your water tested before a copper treatment to see if you're in those ideal ranges. But Q-Train Plus tends to be a pretty safe option that works pretty well. Grass carp will nibble on Chara, but they do not control it. But it could be part of a, like I was talking about, an integrated plan where you have the copper to try to knock it back quick. Aquatic dye will slow it down. The drawback to aquatic dye is it only works in about 3 feet or deeper. Anything 3 feet and shallower, you're still going to have enough sunlight reaching the bottom that Chara is going to grow about as aggressively as it normally would. But deeper than about 3 feet, you will start to see suppression from dye. And then grass carp can kind of help crop it off a little bit as well.
Great, great. I'm not sure if we can answer this one or not, but there's a question. Are there any garden centers or any place that this person can pick up some hardy lilies rock area for their pond?
I'm not as familiar with them. I'm not entirely sure. One of the publications that I have listed in the resources, it is out of Texas, so it's Texas based, but they do actually list some of the nurseries that supply many of the species that we talked about, and they also include some more. It's kind of like with everything these days, you can just about find everything that you need through Amazon. You just want to confirm that whatever nursery that you're ordering from actually lists the species so that you can confirm that, yes, this is the right species, rather than just the common names. But I'm not entirely sure which nurseries or which garden centers in Little Rock do aquatics.
Right. And John, just in case you didn't see it, where you asked where you could find the first session in this webinar, Miss Tara Bennett replied that she can send out a link to part 1 also when she sends out part 2. Damon asked, how can we have someone come out to look at our pond?
Sure. So the first step is to check with your county extension office. Some of the county offices, those agents have been at it long enough and have enough training that they can solve your issue and give you solutions without contacting me. But if you have a newer agent or someone that's not as comfortable or trained in that, they will call me and then we can schedule a visit together. If you're in, within an hour or so of Pine Bluff, then we'll make arrangements to come out and visit fairly quickly. But if it's farther away, if we're talking a 2-hour drive one way, then I might have to see about scheduling multiple stops. But we definitely will get you on the schedule for a visit, especially if it's a complex issue. But check with the county agent first. And if they can't solve it, then we will together work on scheduling a visit to come look at everything.
Will's asking best treatment options for water primrose.
So one of the publications that we have in the additional resources on that Dropbox account is the MP44 and the MP556. So both of those documents are specific to aquatic plant treatment in Arkansas. They were both authored by George Selden, who has just retired. So I'm trying to do my best to fill his place. But specifically on primrose, if you have the ability to remove some by hand with raking or dragging out, that actually is fairly beneficial. And you don't have to use chemicals. A lot of times it will grow back, but removing as much as you can mechanically is pretty helpful to follow up to try to keep it down longer term. Or if you have so much you can't possibly physically remove it, chemicals with the active ingredients 2,4-D, glyphosate, triclopyr, imazapyr, or imazamox do a really good job on it. Again, all of those names, there's no way you'd be able to remember it, but go and look at the MP556 and the MP44 that we have listed on the Dropbox, or I think we got links to them in the chat here. Go download those and they will tell you exactly how to treat them. In fact, the MP556, basically it's a page. This is primrose. This is how you treat it. that's where I would suggest going to for those kinds of details.
Got a question here that says interested in finding arrowhead and rushes. Do the PowerPoints include managing arrowhead and rushes and lizard tail?
Sure. So that would be another one. I would reference you to that Texas Parks and Wildlife publication. They've got several nurseries there that they found in Texas that supply many of those plants, and basically everything they have in that document can be ordered online and shipped to you fairly quickly overnight.
Those resources he's talking about, ladies and gentlemen, are the links that I added in the chat earlier as well. We have a small pond that's about 7 months old, a third of an acre, 12 foot deep in the center. It's located in the woods. No livestock have access, just wildlife. It is stocked with fish, no grass carp, as it was recommended that our pond was too small. We have an aerator that runs 24/7. We have dyed it and we have put enzyme packets in it, which was recommended by the aerator company we bought it from. We have a continuous algae issue, slimy looking green film on top.
Mm-hmm.
Any suggestions on how to get rid of the algae?
Yep. So that would be another candidate for a Q-Trine Plus for a copper sulfate based chemical, and especially for a third of an acre, that would not be a very expensive operation. So probably a copper sulfate based herbicide, and for that pond, probably a nutrient sequestration product, either Foslock or Fosclear are the two commercially available ones that I'm aware of. That should help get it under control. So the copper sulfate is a fast acting thing. It'll kill it within a couple of days, but you'll also need to follow that up about a week after that with a treatment of either Foslock or Fosclear, or try the aluminum sulfate and hydrated lime combination at a 2-to-1 ratio to absorb all the nutrients that algae releases when it dies and lock it down in the mud. Because if you just do chemicals over and over, every 2 to 3 weeks, the entire growing season, you'll have to treat it again. It won't go away, because when they die, they just cycle into the next bloom. So your dye is a good start. The aerator is processing the organics, but it needs a little bit of help. So really those beneficial packets, especially with aeration, they do actually help. They do speed things up. I was being a little bit harsh about the beneficial bacteria and enzymes. Beneficial bacteria and enzymes put into a pond without aeration doesn't make much difference. But if you do have aeration, they absolutely can speed up the processing of organics. So what may have happened is those enzymes are doing their work, but there's just so much nutrient in the pond, they can't get it all processed fast enough. So you may need to use a combo of copper sulfate and a nutrient sequestration like Foslock or Fosclear to help start knocking down those nutrient levels.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've got one more question. It is after 7 o'clock. I'll apologize. We run a little bit long tonight. But with a topic like this, I can see how we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
After this question here, if you have any other further questions, please feel free to contact us, and we'll get it forwarded on to the panelists who can best answer that question and get you an answer sent right back out. The last question I have is, if I cut the top off of button bushes, will they keep growing back? In other words, am I going to have to pull them from the roots, and will that hurt my resident turtles?
Yeah, those dudes are pretty tough.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling, so on terrestrial stuff, we typically just go straight to Roundup, right?
Right.
So you've probably heard of Roundup for terrestrial herbicide treatments. The aquatic version of Roundup is called Rodeo. It's basically the same stuff. It's glyphosate, but it is an aquatic version that's been approved for aquatic use. So if you have some button bushes close to the bank, you might want to opt for one of those aquatic versions and just treat it right on the stump right when you cut it, and that'll absorb some down to the roots and hopefully kill it. But yeah, those things are pretty tough. I'd have to investigate a little bit more on buttonbush specifically on the best way to go about it. Any of the other panelists have a better recommendation?
Yeah, we've not primarily, but by means of trying to clear out buttonbush so we can get to other invasive species, we've had good luck with imazapyr, which is a systemic aquatic herbicide, but there is an aquatic formulation of it. Arsenal, AQ, or Ecomazapyr, and there may be another one, or the brand names. Those, you just have to watch out because it does have soil activity. So if you spray it on the shoreline, under the drip line of a tree, especially trees like willows, it will kill that tree, even if you don't spray it around the entire tree. It soaks through the ground and can be taken up through the roots and will kill the tree, but it does the same thing for the buttonbush. It's your most effective, but that's a caution that you need to take. I would also recommend glyphosate as the other more safer option if you have trees around, because it does not have soil activity like imazapyr.
All right.
The rest of that, it's not going to hurt your turtles.
Right.
Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out for another seminar from the fishing education crew. We appreciate your participation. Keep an eye out. We'll get information out on what our next one's going to be, and we look forward to seeing you then.